The air in the living room, a room I had painted myself in a soft shade of eggshell blue 2 decades ago, was thick with the scent of new leather and something chemical I couldn't quite place, the smell of erasure. My son, Michael, stood with his hands on his hips, surveying the space with the critical eye of a general planning a campaign. His wife, Sarah, directed 2 burly men who were wrestling a massive gray sectional sofa through the doorway, its sharp, modern lines a stark contrast to the gentle curves of the furniture I had shared with my late husband, Arthur. My worn armchair, the one with the faint impression of Arthur's head still visible in the fabric, was already on the front lawn, waiting for a charity truck. I didn't protest. I had learned that my protests were seen not as opinions, but as obstacles. And this whole wall, Sarah said, gesturing with a manicured hand, needs to go. It's so dated. We'll do a floating shelf system, very minimalist. Michael nodded, his focus absolute. Good call. Clean lines. We need this place to reflect who we are now, not who we were. He glanced at me for a fraction of a second, his eyes holding no warmth, only a kind of weary impatience. I stayed quiet, clutching the worn sleeves of my cardigan. I felt like a ghost in my own home, a relic they were politely dusting around before putting me into storage. My gaze drifted to the mantelpiece, the one Arthur had carved from a single piece of oak. It was the heart of the room, the place where we displayed our history, photos of Michael's first steps, his high school graduation, our 40th wedding anniversary. But the photos were gone, replaced by abstract art in sterile black frames. The only thing left of our past was a small, hand-carved wooden cross nestled between 2 succulents. Arthur had made it the year before he passed. His hands, though weakened by illness, had been so steady, sanding the mesquite wood until it was as smooth as a river stone. He'd given it to me on Christmas morning. To remind you, he'd whispered, that faith isn't about the grand cathedrals. It's about the small things you hold on to when everything else is gone. Sarah's eyes landed on it. She wrinkled her nose. What is that thing? It looks like a piece of driftwood. Michael walked over, picked it up, and turned it over in his hands. He held it with the same casual indifference he might hold a piece of junk mail. Oh, this. Dad made it. It's just old. Well, it doesn't go with the new aesthetic, Sarah declared, her voice final. It's junk, Michael. Get rid of it. My breath caught in my throat. Michael, please, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Your father made that for me. He didn't look at me. He looked at Sarah, and in that moment, I saw where his allegiance lay. He gave a short, dismissive sigh. Mom, it's just a piece of wood. We're trying to build a future here, not live in a museum. He walked over to a large black trash bag filled with old magazines and discarded curtains, and without a moment's hesitation, he dropped the cross inside. It landed with a soft, muffled thud, the sound of a heart hitting the bottom of a well. He didn't even look back. He just turned to the delivery men and said, Okay, let's get this couch centered. I stood frozen, the scent of fresh paint and new beginnings choking me. They weren't just redecorating a house. They were systematically dismantling my life, piece by piece, memory by memory. The cross, Arthur's last gift, was now buried under discarded fabric, and yesterday's news deemed worthless. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. The shock was too cold, too deep for that. I simply watched them, this new couple with their clean lines and minimalist future, and I felt a stillness settle over me. It was the stillness of a winter pond, frozen on the surface, but with a current moving silently, powerfully underneath. They thought it was just junk. They had no idea what they had just thrown away, and in their ignorance, they had handed me back a piece of my own power. That night, sleep was a distant country I couldn't visit. The new leather sofa in the living room seemed to suck all the warmth out of the air, and my own bed felt foreign, as if I were a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I waited until the house fell into a deep, rhythmic silence, broken only by the hum of the new stainless steel refrigerator. The digital clock on the oven glowed 2:17 a.m. I slipped out of bed, my feet silent on the cold hardwood floors they'd installed last month. The house felt like a stranger's, full of sharp angles and empty spaces where memories used to be. I found the black trash bag right where Michael had left it, near the back door, ready for the morning pickup. My hands trembled as I untied the knot. The smell of dust and old paper filled my nostrils. I pushed aside crumpled curtains and glossy magazines until my fingers brushed against something hard and smooth. I pulled it out. The mesquite cross felt cool in my hands, a solid, tangible piece of my past. I held it tight, pressing it against my chest, and for a moment, I let the tears I'd been holding back burn behind my eyes. I didn't let them fall. Not yet. I carried it back to my room and sat on the edge of my bed, the faint glow of a street lamp casting long shadows on the wall. I ran my thumb over the surface of the wood, feeling the subtle imperfections where Arthur's knife had slipped, the gentle grain he had so lovingly polished. He had been a builder, a man who understood foundations. He knew that the strongest things were often hidden from view. "They're going to forget, Ellie," he had told me one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the Texas sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. Michael had just gotten engaged to Sarah, and Arthur, with his quiet foresight, saw the ambition in her eyes. They'll be so busy building their own world, they might forget the ground it's built on. Don't let them. He had held my hand then, his grip surprisingly strong. Promise me you'll hold on to what's yours, not with your fists, but with your head. I hadn't fully understood then. I thought he was talking about memories, about dignity. I didn't realize he was talking about something far more literal. I turned the cross over in my hands. There was a tiny seam along the side, almost invisible, unless you knew where to look. Arthur had shown it to me the day he gave it to me. A secret for my secret keeper, he'd said with a wink. My fingernail found the groove, and with a gentle twist, the front of the cross loosened. It wasn't hollow, not exactly. It was a shallow compartment, just deep enough for one thing. I didn't open it all the way. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside. I could feel the faint, crisp edges of the folded paper within, a document that held more weight than all the minimalist furniture and abstract art in this house combined. I snapped the compartment shut. The soft click was the sound of a lock turning, not on a box, but inside of me. A resolve, cold and clear, began to solidify in my gut. They had called this cross junk. They had tossed it away like a piece of trash. They saw an old woman grieving and quiet, someone whose past was an inconvenience to their future. They had forgotten that I was Arthur's wife, his partner. I wasn't just the woman who baked their birthday cakes. I was the woman who had balanced the books for his construction company, who understood blueprints and property lines and the unshakable power of a notarized signature. I placed the cross not on the new floating shelf where it would be judged and dismissed, but in the bottom drawer of my nightstand, tucked beneath my old nursing pins and a bundle of letters from Arthur. It was safe, and so was the secret it held. Letters from Arthur. I lay back in bed, but this time, the house didn't feel like a stranger's. It felt like a battlefield, and I had just retrieved my weapon. The fight wouldn't be loud. It wouldn't be ugly. It would be quiet, deliberate, and built on a foundation they had long forgotten was even there. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the new sterile kitchen island, watching the sun rise over the Texas plains. The light that filled the room felt different, sharper. As I sipped my coffee, my mind drifted back, not just to Arthur, but to the life we had built, the sacrifices we had made, brick by painstaking brick, for the very son who now saw me as a piece of his past to be discarded. I remembered Michael as a boy, all scraped knees and boundless energy, with a dreamer's heart just like his father. When he was 10, he wanted to be an astronaut. We didn't have much money, but Arthur spent a month building him a magnificent cardboard rocket ship in the backyard. I stayed up nights sewing a tiny astronaut suit from an old silver tablecloth. He wore it until the seams gave out. That was the kind of love we gave him, love measured in time and effort, not dollars. When it was time for college, he set his sights on Texas A&M. The tuition was a mountain we couldn't see the top of. I took on extra work, doing freelance bookkeeping for small businesses in town. I'd work late into the night at our small kitchen table, the glow of the calculator my only companion, while Arthur worked overtime at the construction site. We sold our small vacation plot up by Lake Travis, the one we'd always dreamed of building a little cabin on for our retirement. We handed Michael the check for his first semester and told him it was an investment in his future. He'd hugged us both, tears in his eyes, and promised he would make us proud. And he did. He graduated with a degree in business and a heart full of ambition. Then came Sarah, and with her, bigger dreams. A wedding that was a little grander than we could afford. A starter home that was a little beyond their reach. But we helped. We always helped. When Michael wanted to start his own contracting business, to follow in his father's footsteps, we co-signed the loan. Arthur put his own company's reputation on the line as collateral. I spent weeks helping Michael set up his accounting system, teaching him the difference between cash flow and profit, lessons I had learned at Arthur's side. And then, 5 years ago, came the mansion. Michael had found a beautiful, sprawling piece of land just outside of Austin. It was raw, undeveloped, but it had a view of the hill country that could take your breath away. "This is it, Mom," he'd said, his eyes shining with that same 10-year-old astronaut excitement. "This is where I build our legacy." The land was expensive. He and Sarah had saved, but they were short. They needed a significant partner to secure the bank loan for the construction. Arthur was sick by then, his strength failing, but his mind was sharp as ever. We sat at this very table, and he looked at me. "It's a good investment, Ellie," he'd said. "The land is solid, but the boy, his heart is in the right place, but his head gets turned by shiny things." We gave them the money, a significant portion of our life savings. We didn't ask for ownership, not at first, but the bank insisted on a co-signer with substantial assets. So my name went on the deed alongside theirs. It was just a formality, they'd said, a way to get the deal done. I remember the day we signed the papers. Arthur was too weak to come, so I went alone. I signed my name, and in that moment, I wasn't just a mother helping her son. I was a partner, an investor, securing the very ground he would build his future on. Ground that legally was as much mine as it was his. They built their dream house, a monument of glass and steel. Arthur passed away before it was finished. After the funeral, they invited me to move in with them. "You shouldn't be alone, Mom," Michael had said. It felt like an act of love, of care. I see now it was an act of convenience. I sold the house Arthur and I had lived in for 40 years and gave them the proceeds to help with finishing touches. It felt like the right thing to do. Family helps family. But over time, the gratitude faded, replaced by tolerance, and then by resentment. I had become the old furniture in their new modern life. The story they no longer wanted to tell. My sacrifices had been forgotten, my contributions rendered invisible. They thought the money, the land, the house, it was all theirs, a testament to their hard work. They forgot who had laid the foundation. The days following the cross incident settled into a new kind of Cold War, one fought with silences and polite, cutting remarks. I was a ghost, haunting the hallways of my own life. I'd come into the kitchen in the morning, and the conversation between Michael and Sarah would instantly cease. They would give me tight professional smiles, the kind you'd give a stranger in an elevator before turning back to their phones. It was a carefully orchestrated exclusion designed to make me feel not just unwelcome, but irrelevant. Sarah had taken over the cooking completely. "You should rest, Mom," she'd say, her voice dripping with false sweetness as she prepared elaborate meals I knew she'd read about in some lifestyle magazine. But her actions said something else. She was staking her claim, making it clear that this kitchen, this home, was her domain now. My role had been reduced to that of a silent observer. One evening, I was sitting in the living room, trying to read a book, but the words swam before my eyes. They were planning a large dinner party for Michael's new business partners. The guest list was a who's who of Austin's burgeoning tech and real estate scene. Sarah was on the phone with the caterer, her voice crisp and authoritative. "Yes, 7 courses, and I want the wine pairings to be perfect. No, nothing from Texas. Let's stick to French. It has a certain gravitas." She paced back and forth, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "And we'll need the house to ourselves. No distractions." She glanced over at me, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face before she turned away. I knew what no distractions meant. It meant me. Later, I overheard them in their bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. "We can't have her just wandering around," Sarah said, her voice a low, urgent hiss. "She'll start telling one of her old stories about the good old days. It's embarrassing, Michael. These people are important." "What do you want me to do, Sarah? Lock her in her room?" Michael's voice was weary, but there was no defense in it, no hint of standing up for me. "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "Just make sure she stays out of the way. Tell her she's not feeling well. Tell her anything. I just want this one night to be perfect. This deal could be huge for us." The deal. It was always about the next deal, the next step up the ladder. I was a loose rung they were afraid someone might step on. The night of the party, the house was transformed. The air buzzed with champagne-fueled laughter and the low thrum of sophisticated conversation. I stayed in my room, as instructed. I could hear the clinking of glasses, the murmur of voices, the curated playlist of soft jazz filtering under my door. I felt like a prisoner in a castle I had helped build. Around 10 p.m., I stepped out to get a glass of water. The hallway was empty. As I passed the dining room, I saw them. Michael was holding court at the head of the table, a confident smile on his face. Sarah, seated beside him, was a vision of elegance and charm. One of the guests, a man with a booming voice, asked, "So, Michael, you built this incredible place yourself?" Michael puffed out his chest slightly. "Well, I had a great team. But yeah, this has been my vision from the start. I had found the land, designed it, built it from the ground up." He didn't mention Arthur. He didn't mention me. He didn't mention the life savings I had poured into the very foundation beneath their feet. I stood there in the shadows of the hallway, a glass of water in my hand, and I understood. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was a deliberate, calculated rewriting of history. They were not just erasing me from the present. They were erasing me from the past. And as I watched my son accept praise for a vision that was never his alone, I knew my quiet war had to begin. I retreated to my room not with tears, but with a cold, hard clarity. They could have their party. They could have their perfect night. But the ground they were celebrating on was about to shift beneath them. The decision was not made in anger, but in the profound silence of my room after the last guest's car had pulled away. The hollow echo of the party lingered, a ghost of a life I was no longer a part of. The next morning, while the house was still quiet, I retrieved the mesquite cross from its hiding place. My hands were steady now. The time for trembling was over. I sat at my small desk and gently twisted the front panel open. There, folded into a tight, neat square, was the deed. I carefully unfolded it. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded, but the words were as clear and binding as the day they were written. Deed of trust, lot 42, Travis County, Texas. And there were the names, listed as joint tenants with rights of survivorship: Arthur Collins, Eleanor Collins, and Michael Collins. My name, not as a footnote, not as a guarantor, but as an owner, an equal partner in the very earth their mansion stood upon. I remembered the day Arthur and I bought this land. It wasn't a manicured lot then. It was a wild, sprawling piece of Texas hill country, covered in live oaks and stubborn wildflowers. We walked it for hours, our boots kicking up dust. Arthur had turned to me, his eyes full of a vision I could barely comprehend. "This is it, Ellie," he'd said. "This is legacy land, not for a house, but for a home. A place where our family can put down roots so deep no storm can shake them." His dream was for a rambling, comfortable home, a place for grandchildren to run free. Not this cold monument to ambition that Michael and Sarah had erected. I took out my phone and took a clear, high-resolution photo of the deed, making sure every signature, every legal description, every notarized stamp was perfectly legible. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called Robert Henderson, Arthur's old friend, and the lawyer who had handled our estate planning. He was retired now, living a quiet life in Fredericksburg, but his mind was as sharp as a tack. "Eleanor." His voice was warm, filled with a pleasant surprise. "It's been too long. Is everything all right?" "Robert, I need your advice," I said, my voice even. "It's about the land, the Austin property." I explained everything: the redecorating, the disrespect, the cross, the party, the erasure of my past. I told him about the deed hidden inside the cross. He was silent for a long moment on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his brilliant legal mind. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and serious. "Arthur always said you were the strong one, Eleanor. He knew. That's why he structured it this way. Joint tenancy means you have an indivisible interest. They can't sell it, refinance it, or transfer it without your signature. You own as much of that house as they do, no matter what they might believe." "What are my options, Robert?" I asked. "You have several," he said, and I could hear him smiling. "You can force a sale of the property through a partition action. You can sue for your share of the value, or you can use it as leverage. The kind of leverage that reminds people very clearly who holds the power." He paused. "What do you want to do, Eleanor?" I looked at the cross lying on my desk. It was more than a piece of wood. It was a vessel of memory, of love, of foresight. It was Arthur's final lesson to me. I thought of his words: "Don't let them forget the ground it's built on." "I want them to remember," I said, my voice filled with a resolve that felt as solid and unshakable as the Texas soil itself. "And I want them to understand that this house is a home, not a trophy. It's time for a lesson in foundations." Robert chuckled softly. "I'll start drafting the paperwork. This is going to be a master class." I hung up the phone, a sense of profound calm washing over me. The ghost in the hallway was about to become the lady of the house once more. The plan Robert and I devised was not one of swift, dramatic revenge, but of slow, creeping reality. It began with a letter, not a fiery legal threat, but a quiet, formal inquiry sent from a respected Austin law firm Robert had recommended. The letter was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Michael Collins and arrived on a Tuesday in a crisp, cream-colored envelope that looked deceptively benign. I was in the kitchen, making tea, when Michael brought in the mail. He tossed it on the counter, a pile of bills and junk mail. He didn't even notice the one with the embossed letterhead. Sarah saw it first. She picked it up, her brow furrowed. "Who is Henderson, Thorne and Associates?" she asked, slitting it open with a manicured nail. I watched from the corner of my eye as she read it. Her posture stiffened. The color drained from her face. "Michael," she said, her voice a sharp, strangled whisper, "you need to see this." He took the letter from her trembling hand. I saw his eyes scan the page, then scan it again, his confident facade crumbling with each word. The letter was simple. It stated that their firm had been retained by Mrs. Eleanor Collins to review her assets, including her joint tenancy interest in the property at their address. It politely requested a copy of all financial documents related to the property, including mortgage statements, property tax records, and homeowners insurance, for a comprehensive portfolio review. It ended with a simple sentence: "We look forward to your prompt cooperation." "What is this?" Michael finally managed to say, his voice barely audible. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Portfolio review? What assets?" I took a slow sip of my tea before answering. "My assets, Michael," I said calmly. "The ones I invested in this house. I'm just getting my affairs in order. It's what people my age do." "But why a law firm?" Sarah stammered. "Why not just ask us?" "Because," I said, meeting her gaze without flinching, "I wanted to make sure everything was handled professionally. It's better this way. Cleaner." The word cleaner hung in the air, a direct echo of her own obsession with clean lines and a clean aesthetic. The irony was not lost on them. They spent the rest of the day in hushed, frantic conversation. I heard them on the phone with their bank, their voices tight with anxiety. I heard the words deed, co-owner, and legal rights repeated over and over. They were scrambling, trying to understand the ground that was suddenly shifting beneath them. They had believed I was a dependent, a silent fixture in their home. They were now being forced to see me as a partner, an entity with legal standing they could not ignore. 2 days later, the second phase of the plan unfolded. Robert's firm sent another letter, this one a bit more direct. It was a formal offer to purchase my share of the property for a sum that was, as Robert put it, aggressively fair. The amount was staggering, representing 49% of the home's current market value, a fortune they did not have. The letter gave them 30 days to respond. If they could not buy me out, the letter gently suggested, the alternative would be a court-ordered partition sale of the entire property. The house would be sold and the proceeds divided. The panic in the house became palpable. Michael stopped going to the office. Sarah stopped her endless redecorating. They spent their days huddled over laptops, their faces grim. They had built their kingdom on what they thought was solid ground, but they had forgotten to check the map that had my name written all over it. I continued my quiet routine. I read my books. I tended to the small garden patch in the backyard, and I took long, peaceful walks. I never mentioned the letters. I never brought up the law firm. I simply let the reality of their situation sink in. They had treated me as if I were invisible, but my name on that deed was now the most visible thing in their lives. The power dynamic in the house had been irrevocably altered, not by shouting or tears, but by the quiet, unyielding weight of the law. Arthur would have been proud. The 30 days passed in a haze of strained silence and barely concealed panic. The atmosphere in the house was so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife. Michael and Sarah avoided me, moving through the rooms like specters in their own home, their whispered arguments echoing in the hallways at night. They never responded to the buyout offer. I knew they couldn't. Their lifestyle was a carefully constructed facade, built on loans and leveraged assets. They didn't have the capital. They had gambled on my silence, and they had lost. On the 31st day, the final legal notice arrived by certified mail, petition for partition by sale. The court date was set. This was it, the point of no return. That evening, they cornered me in the living room. The grand, minimalist space that was once Sarah's pride and joy now felt like a courtroom. The floating shelves seemed to mock them with their emptiness. Michael stood before me, his face pale and haggard. "Mom, you can't do this," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "This is our home. This is our son's home. You'll destroy everything we've worked for." Sarah stood beside him, her arms crossed, her eyes blazing with a desperate, cornered fury. "After everything we've done for you?" She spat. "We gave you a place to live, and this is how you repay us, by trying to make us homeless?" I looked at her, my expression calm, my heart steady. "You gave me a room, Sarah," I corrected her gently. "In a house I paid for. There's a difference." I turned my gaze to Michael. "And you are not being made homeless. You are being asked to face the consequences of your actions. You are being asked to acknowledge a debt. Not a financial one, but a moral one." "A moral debt?" Michael laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "What is that even supposed to mean? This is about money. You want to cash out and leave us with nothing." "No, Michael," I said, and for the first time, a note of steel entered my voice. "This is about respect. It's about a handmade wooden cross you called junk and threw in the trash. It's about being told my presence is an embarrassment. It's about being erased from my own family's history, in my own home." I paused, letting the words sink in. This house was supposed to be a legacy of love, the kind your father and I built our lives on. You and Sarah have turned it into a monument to yourselves, built on a foundation of disrespect. A foundation, I might add, that I co-own. Sarah stepped forward, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "This is insane. You're doing all of this over a stupid piece of wood?" "That stupid piece of wood held this," I said. I reached into my purse and pulled out a certified copy of the deed. I didn't hand it to them. I simply held it up. It held the truth you both chose to forget. I unfolded it slowly. Arthur put my name on this deed for a reason. He knew that one day your ambition might blind you to everything else. He knew I might need to remind you what this family was truly built on. Michael stared at the paper in my hand, his face ashen. The fight seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a devastating wave of understanding. He finally saw it. Not just the legal document, but the decades of love and sacrifice it represented. He stumbled back and sank onto the massive gray sofa, burying his face in his hands. Sarah stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. The fire in her eyes had been extinguished, replaced by the cold, stark realization of their predicament. They weren't fighting a bitter old woman. They were fighting a legal partner, one whose claim was as solid as the stone foundation of the house itself. The battle was over. The silence that filled the room was no longer mine alone. It was theirs too. It was the sound of their carefully constructed world collapsing. In the weeks that followed, the house remained standing, but the kingdom within it had fallen. The partition suit moved forward, a quiet, inexorable legal process that operated far from the realm of their emotional pleas and belated apologies. Michael and Sarah were forced to hire their own lawyer, who, after reviewing the documents, gave them the grim, unvarnished truth. I had every right to force the sale. Their only option was to negotiate. The power had shifted completely. I was no longer the silent figure in the corner. I was the one setting the terms. We didn't meet in a lawyer's office. I insisted we meet at the kitchen table, the one they had bought to replace the old oak, one Arthur had loved. I wanted them to face this reckoning in the heart of the home they had tried to claim as solely their own. Michael was a changed man. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a humbled, somber quiet. Sarah was subdued, her usual sharp edges softened by defeat. "I don't want to sell the house," I told them, my voice calm and even. "Arthur and I intended for this land to be a home for generations, but it will be a home built on respect, not entitlement." I slid a new document across the table. It was a post-nuptial agreement drafted by Robert that redefined our living arrangement. It stipulated that I would drop the partition suit. In exchange, they would formally acknowledge my 49% ownership and my legal rights as a co-owner. It also included a new clause, a respect and dignity provision, legally binding them to treat me as an honored member of the family, with rights to use all common areas of the house and to be included in family decisions. Finally, it transferred full financial responsibility for the mortgage and taxes to them, effective immediately. They had to stand on their own 2 feet. They read it in silence. Michael looked up, his eyes filled with a weary relief. "We'll sign it," he said without hesitation. Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the tabletop, but I wasn't finished. "There's one more thing," I said. I reached into my bag and placed the mesquite cross on the table between us. Its smooth, dark wood seemed to absorb the light in the room. "This," I said, "will be returned to its place on the mantelpiece, not as a decoration, but as a reminder of your father's love and a reminder of the foundation this family is built on. Every time you look at it, I want you to remember what you almost threw away." Tears welled in Michael's eyes. He reached out and touched the cross reverently. "I'm so sorry, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I forgot who I was. I forgot who you were." I simply nodded. The apology, genuine as it was not what I needed. What I needed was the change that had brought it about. In the months that followed, things did change. The house felt lighter. The silence was no longer heavy with resentment, but comfortable with a newfound peace. Michael started spending more time with me, asking about his father, about our life before. Sarah, in her own way, tried. She started making me tea in the mornings, and once she asked for my recipe for pot roast. They were small steps, but they were steps in the right direction. The cross now sits in the center of the mantel, a quiet, powerful sentinel in the heart of our home. It's no longer just a piece of wood. It's a testament. They thought that because I was old, I was weak. They mistook my silence for surrender. But a mother's love is a quiet force, and her memory is a long one. They threw my husband's cross in the trash, calling it junk. But in doing so, they reminded me of the one thing of true value I had held in reserve: the truth. And the truth, I've learned, is the one deed that can never be thrown away. Truth. It is the foundation upon which all else is built.